there's a real power in being able to embrace that life isn't fair. And that power means that you can make choices that start to level up the playing field for you. A little bit of information potentially goes an awful long way at just the right time. And that's the mission that I'm really on right now. How can you start to share information?
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magecha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Yambe Sumboyambe. Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I might say I'm average.
I think I might have pronounced your name terribly. So just for everybody else, you introduce yourself.
Oh, it's Nyambe Sumbonyambe. You weren't that bad.
Thank you. That's very kind. We start this podcast with, who is Yam?
Great question. Some of my answers probably a little bit standard. I am a husband. I am a father to two rascally little children. I'm a man that's about to leave a job that I've been in for the last 20 years. I spent most of my career in the life sciences industry. Very much looking forward to new things to come. Going to dabble my hand at entrepreneurship, which is something that I've had a big passion for a long time, and it's a good time for me to make that jump. I like to think I'm a good friend. I'm a brother. I'm a son to two parents who originally came from Zambia. We moved here as a 1-year-old, so I've had very much like the UK experience, but got very Zambian roots and really, really strong heritage from that perspective. I'm an Arsenal fan. Uh-oh. All of the things I've said, and then it's the Arsenal fan, it's that
I don't actually care, to be completely honest, but I know there'll be lots of people that do.
Yeah, that's it, divisive. There's lots of people turning off from the podcast straight away, and I was like, this Arsenal
switched
guy.
Off.
See you later.
Anything else you'd add?
I'm a man of the community. I'm a big advocate for how we can enable and support people from underrepresented backgrounds to do well in life, and I think we have a common interest in social mobility. That's a big thing for me, but probably extends to all or other facets in terms of maybe some of the underrepresented characters that have issues and challenges because of some of the systemic challenges that we see in life. That's one thing that maybe whirs around in the background around some of the stuff that I do as well. And
growing up as a Zimbabwean little boy in the UK, what was that like?
So the guys from Zimbabwe are my cousin, so I'm from Zambia, so very close. We're just next to each other. Used to be the same country once upon a time. Mm-hmm. Really lucky as a child. I grew up, I'm going to say something that people are going to be laughing. I grew up in a place called Grimsby. It's not very often that people say I'm really lucky and I grew up in Grimsby.
Yeah.
But I often sort of think I was. I had a loving family. I had all of the tropes of being like the token black guy, the only black guy.
Yeah.
The black people I knew were related or very close to me. But it probably wasn't an issue for me in lots of ways. I very much sort of grew up a little bit naive to maybe some of the issues or challenges that people sort of see in the world. And I feel fortunate for that. I had almost like a little bit of a cocoon of what I would say really great people around me. Went to really good schools. Just had a really happy childhood, lots of play. I've got 4 siblings, a slightly complicated family background, I think, as most people do, but we grew up in a house with 4 of us and lots of different things going on. There's a big span between us. So my older sister's 10 years older than me, my younger sister's 10 years younger than me. So we've got like a real sort of mix going on. But life was pretty fast paced. We were a very social family. There was always stuff going on. There was always people at the house. The party was always at the kitchen table. Big conversations about the most ridiculous topics, and there was always a semi-argument to be had or to be won.
There's
so
a competition
as
well.
There's everything.
There was.
Literally, we'd race across the road. That's the type of competition we potentially have in our house.
Yeah. And what was it that you wanted to aspire to when you were younger?
So I imagine there's a big part of my life where I was like, oh, I really want to be a footballer. I think as most little kids, I'd love to play for Arsenal. I was obsessed with Ian Wright as a kid.
Right.
It was the reason why I support Arsenal now. I think if you spoke to my parents, like many black kids, I was born to be a doctor. I come from a very medically minded family. My dad's a consultant radiologist. My mum was a children's nurse, diabetic specialist. So we've grown up in and around the NHS. It's the reason that we came to this country in the first place.
Right.
So I think probably for a long time, medical was something that I had in mind as something I'd aspire to. It didn't quite work out like that for me. I ended up working within the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry, which was very close to medical in some ways. But I always sort of laugh that my parents not quite understanding that they always had this mindset, well, eventually you could
switch.
You could switch. you could
just, just pop across.
Doesn't quite work out like that. But no, I think they're pushing in the background. Really, they just wanted us to be happy. They wanted us to be successful. They wanted us to have good opportunities. And I think a big part of that's having a good education and hopefully securing a job that gives you a level of security. So I always sort of laugh about it. We weren't forced in a ridiculous way, but we just pushed to do our best to try and excel and sort of really kick on from a life perspective.
And I'm going to ask you a potentially awkward question.
Oh, thanks for the warning.
I don't normally warn people. But why should people stay tuned to this conversation?
Because I'm a really interesting guy. Now, I've followed your podcast for a period of time and I think you've got a habit of opening people up around really interesting lines of conversation. I've got a story to tell in terms of my lived experience, some of which I'm working out right now. I've got aspirations in the next phase of my life to use storytelling as a platform to help people better themselves, to further themselves, particularly from a career or personal growth perspective. Interested in terms of where the questions might go to, an opportunity maybe for me to discover a little bit of who I am and where I'm trying to go to. So anybody that's listening right now, wanting to see a man figure himself out in front of you, I think there could be some really interesting insights to come.
Great. Where does that desire to help? Because you work in the talent, learning, development in life sciences. Your brand is about discovering what makes you tick, development, learning, growing. Where does that come from?
Probably I'd look back at my career and I'd often sort of suggest that I've been good at a lot of things, but not amazing.
Right.
And I think often you have that old trope where people talk about those that can't do teach. And I think there's lots of my career where some of that's probably been true. I've really excelled in coaching and enabling people to really sort of be at the best. I think for various reasons, learned how to tune into the things that people don't say, learn how to connect with people in a way that makes them really sort of be the best. And I think that's something it's been like a consistent theme in my career so far.
But when you go back, so before the career piece, what do you think lends itself to the career?
So, and exactly where I was going, I think there's a recognition when I look back at my life now, and I talked about earlier on almost like a little bit of a naive sort of upbringing and experience of the world. I think as I've come into myself and grown a bit, one of the things that I've recognised and I really rail against now is the fact that life's pretty unfair.
Life's pretty unfair?
Yeah, life is unfair.
Okay.
I think it's a challenging or taboo topic because, we live in a world where people are chasing equity and equality, which are amazing ideals, but, history tells us that we've not seen that in the world in lots of sort of ways to where we are today, and we maybe won't see that in the future. I mentioned at the beginning I've got two rascally mixed-race children where I often sort of think about how do I equip them for their future. And one of the things that I have in mind is, there's a real power in being able to embrace that life isn't fair. And that power means that you can make choices that start to level up the playing field for you. And when I sort of think about my own experience, probably came to me a little bit late. And I look back now and sort of think about maybe the choices that I made, the way I showed up in certain situations, what my expectations were. a little bit of information potentially goes an awful long way at just the right time. And that's the mission that I'm really on right now. How can you start to share information? I think the truth about what it takes to get ahead in life and business is definitely out there. It's just not equally distributed. A class of your own really sort of digs into those experiences from a social mobility, social class perspective. But if you're from a low economic social background, or you haven't maybe got all of the resources and privileges of some, or in my case, I sort of think about my upbringing. I had, in lots of scopes, everything you could possibly imagine, but I also had two parents who were Zambian, African, try to bring up their children in an environment which is completely foreign to them. And that sort of sets off a different sort of set of challenges, whether that's around what their expectations might be, the rules they might enforce, how they might guide you. And I look now back at that and I just think it's amazing how they've evolved as people. This is me talking about my parents evolving, but also how they've helped us evolve as people as well. And I kind of think this weird microcosm of how you potentially bring up with issues or challenges or things that you're trying to work through often are the things that lead to your superpowers and the things that you can potentially bring to the world. And that's my point when I go back to this recognition of the world not being fair. If you can start to have a look and sort of see the issue or the challenge or the game that you're potentially involved in, you can start to figure out actually, how do you want to play it? You might also figure out that you don't want to play that game. Yeah. And that's a really empowering position to potentially be in. So that's what I'm really trying to key into and go after. How do you help people to thrive and succeed based on matching their talents and their strengths to an environment where they'll be seen and recognised and valued? But also, by the same token, how can you empower people to change their situation if they're not happy? So I think people have probably got a lot more agency than they potentially believe sometimes.
Yeah, it's not in my control. It's in somebody else's. It's not my fault. This happened to me. It's not my fault. This is how I was born. So how do you change that mindset and change the outcome not to be what you don't want it to be?
100%. And, nobody wants to hear your woulda, shoulda, couldas in life. Like, you've got to talk about what are the actions that you've taken. I think, even beyond that, one of the things I've learned in a life where I feel like I've made a shed load of mistakes along the way, like, with good intentions, you can get away with most mistakes. There's some things that, they're catastrophic, but most mistakes really don't matter.
Yeah.
And if you can learn from them, that's an amazing position to be in. So, how can we encourage people to be proactive, to take those steps that you talked about there?
You have mixed race children, you described. In fact, no, you didn't. You described them. You described your children as mixed race rascals.
Yes.
Let's be honest. When you think about your upbringing to their upbringing, you weren't necessarily navigating the different race. You were black and that is what you were. You've now got these little people who may have more or less challenges to life. Maybe they don't, maybe it'll be easier, maybe it'll be harder, I don't know. What's your view in how you bring both those cultures, traditions, into their life in a way that's empowering rather than disadvantaging?
I think it's a great question, and it's something me and my wife talk about all the time. I probably sort of say I've got a bit of a superhero complex where I try and solve problems constantly. And even if I sort of think about my family, like me and my wife were together for 10 years before we got married. The fact that she waited that long for me is ridiculous. I'm genuinely not worth it, I don't think, but I appreciate that she did. But I think in the time running up to getting married, to our wedding, like we got to the point where our parents, and bear in mind I come from a black African Christian family, to hear them at the point sort of saying, can you guys just get on and have children? We're ready for grandkids. We don't even care about the wedding anymore. Anyway, we did do wedding and then children first. But having mixed race kids was something that was on my mind. Like, I think I took it upon myself to have conversations with people around our family, start to think about what that might look for them. And the reality is, my parents would never have envisioned me when I was born having a white wife. That wouldn't have been in their mindset. They grew up in Zambia. That wasn't common there whatsoever. Yeah. They've grown up with a lot of tradition and heritage, and like any normal person, they'd want that for their children. That's pretty normal. The flip side, I have a look at my wife's family, and, you know, we had all of those conversations where you sort of talk about race, racism, the issues, all the challenges that, you know, kids potentially going to have, you know, trying to help them to key into the fact that the word nigger is not going to hurt in the same way until you hear one of your grandchildren come home to you and sort of say, somebody called me this. It'll cut differently at that point. It'll start to resonate in a way that you might not be ready for. You know, we really sort of try hard to talk openly about everything regards to our family, our children. I remember my father-in-law one time asking me, it's been interesting, Black history must become more and more of a thing over the last few years, right?
Yeah.
I remember a time ago, and there'd been a TV programme on which was, I think, sort of charting like the rise of various different Black artists and musical artists. A lot of them were talking about their experiences, and one of the things that my father-in-law picked up on was, you know, they all call themselves Black. Like even the guys that are mixed race, like why would they say that they're Black and not be comfortable to sort of say they're mixed race? And like, you know, receive the question. I love the fact that he's happy to sort of bring these type of things up. Right?
And he's comfortable enough to have the
100%.
conversation with you.
Which it needs to be, and it has to be in that sort of way. But like trying to describe, like, you know, for the majority, in certain situations, it's easier to say you're Black because you feel like there's a closer affinity to some of the issues or challenges you might see with systemic challenges with white privilege, with all of the issues associated with race and racism. So it's easier to categorize yourself because you're very obviously not white.
Yeah.
You know, getting into those conversations, I think, is fascinating. I go back to my experiences again, maybe as a child. I had a very white upbringing, but actually all my white friends were pretty cool. I was in a situation where there'd be times where there might be an issue around racism, and you know, some of the kids would be sorting out before it even become a thing for me. I was quite lucky to have that type of
it didn't even get
that
to you.
support network. There's other times where it wasn't like that,
Yeah,
but there was a lot of times where, you know, that's kind of what I was growing up with. So trying to engage and sort of share some of those issues or challenges in a way that makes sense to all of our family, I think has been like an interesting or topical conversation. And I think it's been challenging for all parties. I think it's really important to talk about it. It's really easy to go, the white side of my family struggle with this. The Black side of my family have had to learn and adapt and think very differently about some of the things here as well. You know, where I come from, like my parents would usually get the right to name our firstborn child. My wife had been thinking about the firstborn child from when she was playing with dolls. Like, my daughter's called Isabel. Isabel was named Isabel long, long before I came on the scene. So the whole idea of like taking that away from my wife it was never going to happen. And we had to have some really interesting conversations where we got our way, was always going to get our way, but they weren't completely happy or comfortable with that. So trying to find that balance between all of these things, I think starts to become really, really challenging, but at the same time, interesting. And I think maybe the point I wanted to make here with that Superman complex, one of the things that struck me a little bit later on is it took a mixed race friend of mine to say to me, right, you know, you can have these conversations and try and help and support people, which is important to do. But you also need to recognise that as a Black guy, your mixed race children are going to deal with a load of things that you've never seen or you've not had to deal with.
Exactly.
And you need to be ready to sort of key in and support them. And so for me, I always sort of think we want them to know and embrace both sides of the heritage. We hope to build our kids in a way that they value themselves, in a way that they know who they are, what they want, what they're here to do, in a way that when they're questioned or challenged or pushed to do things that they don't want to do or doesn't resonate with them, they're strong enough to say no and take their own path. And I think that's the hope, because they'll be abused for it might not be for race, it could be for anything. It could be for completely anything, but we hope that we prepare them to either manage that or be able to talk to us about it.
Have the level of resilience to manage it.
Yeah. You
said something earlier, which is your wife waited for you for 10 years and you're not sure why. Why? What happened? Take us through that story of why it took you 10 years. Because it sounds like there's something there. I don't know if there is.
There probably isn't, if I'm completely honest with you. I laugh and joke about it because I think it's a long time to court, I think, as people would have said back in the day.
Court? I haven't heard that word in a long time.
Credibility has just gone down. I've killed myself completely. But
no, I think it's increased, actually. You courted your wife to be.
I did. Like, I kind of sort of feel like we've got a really solid relationship, and a big part of that's because we really know each other. We really love each other. We've had the opportunity to learn the good, bad, the ugly, and made a decision to stay together. And I think that's really important. You know, you have kids, and it's the biggest test you could potentially take on. Like, every day is a problem. I said earlier on, I call them rascals, and I do. They're the most lovable and adorable children you could ever potentially meet. But by the same token, like everybody else's, they're a constant challenge, and they're testing as they're growing. So you've got to be ready
They're
to do
pushing
that.
your limits and the boundaries
Yeah, 100%.
every moment of the day.
So teamwork becomes an important part of that, right? So I shouldn't wait for me at all. We had a great time as young people, traveling, doing lots of things. We had lots of experiences. I think we both look back now and think actually the biggest joy in our life is our children, and we could have started doing that a lot earlier. But there's a balance, right? You can't have absolutely everything. So I wouldn't say that she waited for me, but there were various situations. Even my mother-in-law calling, going, "Yeah, we love you. We know you love your daughter. Why are you waiting? Why? What's going on?" So we've had those along the way that just maybe sort of perpetuated like the length of time that it took before we got to that point. But I'd like to say on both our behalf that, you know, we were both really happy. So we're pretty cool with it. So probably not as much in that as you might have thought.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below. And when you think about growing up and you think about where you are today, what's the biggest regret so far?
Oh, it's a hell of a question, right? Regrets are hard. And I say that because actually a bit of advice that I had recently is you should regret the things that you did instead of the things that you didn't. And I often sort of think like there's a million and one things that you could potentially regret in life, but actually those experiences, they make you who you are.
Yep.
I think maybe the question I'd potentially sort of say is I've probably played it relatively safe in most things in life.
Okay.
And I often sort of think, are there times where I could have pushed myself a bit more, taken a little bit more risk? And part of that's playing into current decisions in life in terms of where I'm potentially trying to go to next. Like, I think it's really easy to sometimes play within yourself, maybe not to completely play to just your strengths because there's other things in life that you might need to potentially do. So I think that's the bit that I'd sort of say, are the ways that I could have really put myself out in a way that would have tested me even more so and potentially had the additional returns or gains based on how you might put yourself into the world.
And so how do you think about that in terms of output, input, growth? What's the thing that you're measuring to go, I could have done something slightly differently or put myself in a situation that was slightly different?
So, I've spent 20 years at one organisation. I've had a great career, which I'm really proud of there. And I think, you talk about what you might measure. I leave or have left that organisation with friends for life, with the most amazing memories, knowing that we've done some brilliant work. If you start to maybe sort of think about the hierarchical structure of organisations, in that 20-year span, I got to an associate director level in a global organisation, massive organisation. Opportunity to lead some really cool things, some great experiences. But if I sort of look back now and go, could I have gone further? Could I have done more? I honestly think yes. And some of that was me maybe not quite being mature enough early enough. Some of it was maybe not, again, having the understanding of the game. How do you really progress within organisations like that? And that's a big part of what probably in my latter stage of my career, I've really spent the time to really hone in and understand. And I've invested a lot of time in enabling and supporting people to start to create the clarity in terms of either your values, your goals, your aspirations, But then align that with whatever it takes to build the confidence for you to act, for you to progress, for you to engage. And those are the things that I'm really enjoying experimenting with right now, and sort of thinking, how can I do that at a scalable sort of level? So that's what I maybe come back to in terms of, did I have the guidance, the know-how that I needed earlier in my career to make more progressive, risky choices that potentially could have had bigger returns?
And when you say bigger returns, what's the return you're looking for?
All of them. Like, I sit there and think, yeah, I've got to do some really cool things that I talked about. Could I have done even cooler things that would have been even more fun?
Yeah.
I think about the impact that I've been able to have on our people, our organisation, on the customers that we serve, on the patients that we're here for. Could I have had a bigger impact in that time? Yeah, 100%. And all of that, if you sort of progress in the right way, has got a monetary return, which is really important to everybody. Could I have earned significantly more, which should enable me to do the other things that I potentially want to do in life as well? And I think, again, the answer to that is yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So I think across the board, there's a whole scope in terms of how you're able to position yourself, how you're able to deliver effectively, consistently over time, can really have a big impact on your opportunities and how you can progress in big organisations.
And if you think about what's coming next, because being employed versus being an entrepreneur or figuring out what your business is or whatever it is where you have to go find the work and all of those wonderful and beautiful things that we do, what excites you most about the next part of the journey?
A whole new level of autonomy.
Okay.
I think probably put myself in that sort of space where I've been a bit of an entrepreneur. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to test myself in a very different way. Some of the things that I believe in my superpowers are an ability to connect with people, to collaborate. I'm innovative. I'm good at sort of thinking of different ways that we could potentially deal with solutions and problems. I think I do a really good job of helping people progress, learn, apply what they're learning. And I think having the opportunity to do that under my own steam is something I'm really excited about. And how can you do that at scale? That's the challenge that I'm really, really excited about. I've been able to, in a large organisation but relatively small controlled environment, be able to deliver lots of different things. I'm sort of really excited about how I can start to align my goals and aspirations with other people, organisations that are focused on trying to achieve the same type of things and create the type of synergies and partnerships that lead to the magic that we all want to potentially sort of see in the world.
Yeah.
And that might be one person at a time. That's cool. But I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing how I can grow and progress in that way.
And what about family? At this point, like, it takes a certain kind of person, a certain type of person from a risk profile. You've just you've played it safe. And here you are with two rascals. I love that name. I'm going to call them that throughout. But the two rascals that are young, and you've taken a big decision. Or what potentially feels like a big decision. What's your advice to others going through something, thinking about, considering? What do they need to do?
I've got lots of people in mind that say, don't listen to other people's advice.
Oh, God, yeah.
But I do think there's a bit around taking considered risks. Where I'm trying to go to isn't something that's happened overnight. I think I'm hopeful that I'm going to have that moment where I am the overnight success, but that overnight success is going to be a result of years and years of work. So for me, I think being able to take considered, insightful steps based on data, information, being able to really assess your capabilities and your ability to deliver on your promises, I think starts to become really important. I think when I think about my children, like, more than anything else, I want to be a really solid example to them. Mm-hmm. I'm in a fortunate position where I can take a bit of a risk and try something. The reality is, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to be working in a startup space. I need to be able to sell a promise and get people to believe me and come on a journey with me, which I'm really excited about. But I also have to be a practical and a bit of a pragmatist as well. I've got like the safeguards in place that mean that if things aren't working, there's options and things I can do. And it's one of those moments where the way I'm sort of setting up, it's a case of burn the boats. We're going after this. And I think one of the things that I feel really fortunate about is I've got all the support you could ever imagine. The one person that I was kind of a bit, how do I have this conversation with my wife when I say I'm going to walk away from this organisation and start my own thing? It was my wife in terms of what does that look like. The majority of people I've spoken to are like, you should have done this years ago. You'll be a great success. We wish you all the best and we're here to support you. We want to see you win. When I spoke to my wife, like literally within seconds, she went, you'll be amazing.
Oh,
Honestly, and that was all I needed. And that's given me the energy, the confidence to do everything that sort of followed post there. So, I think I'm in a good position.
awesome. What amazing place to be. And have the internal confidence, but also the help and support to go, we can do this.
Yeah.
And we can do this together.
Yeah, very much so.
One of the reasons why we connected originally was you host a podcast on a very similar theme. You've talked about social class, social mobility, and all of those things. And so I kind of felt the need. We felt the need. I can't remember which way around it was, but we connected. And we share this shared vision, passion for doing something about the social class, the underrepresented groups, and trying to share stories, share experiences of what it feels like and is and can be, and how difficult it can be at certain points. What took you into that world? Why is it something you're so interested in?
So I think in our conversation we've touched on a couple of themes. This whole idea of life not being fair.
Yeah.
An element of accountability to excuse the pun, but like be the change that you want to see. I think there's a big part of that. When I first got into the podcasting, the organisation I was at were very big in terms of development of the people. I'd done a management qualification, but part of this management qualification, you got the opportunity to do a project. And I loved the opportunity to try and figure out ways that I can combine all of the elements I'm driving from a commercial perspective to my social impact goals. So I pitched an idea to work with an organisation called the ABPI, which is the governing body for the pharmaceutical industry, to talk about, how do we connect in a way that we can start to build up the conversation around ED&I in the industry. But also we'd sort of seen at that point, not too long after George Floyd had happened, our EBRG in our organisation, again, when I sort of talk about the heritage of our organisation, I think we've had EBRGs and a black EBRG going back over 50 years in the States, but we launched the UK version of that EBRG maybe 4.5 years ago now.
Sorry, before you go on, what is an EBRG for our audience?
Thank you. This is a problem coming out of corporate world. You're talking a lot of acronyms, right? Yeah, please hold me accountable to that. So EBRGs are employee business resource groups. So like-minded people that come together. What's amazing about them, the one that can create some safe spaces where you can feel seen, recognised, and be with people who are like you. But I think when they really sort of tap into that business perspective, they can really help to create powerful cultures, informed choices around, most organisations are in that position where they want to be representative of the society that they're in, so they can tap into rich insights, information. So there's a whole scope of different ways that EBRGs can potentially enable and support businesses to be really effective and ultimately drive the equity, diversity, inclusion that we all want to see. But I kind of recognise, when you sort of think big industry, like I'm really lucky to be at a large organisation that invests quite a lot in that type of thing.
Yeah.
As I'd started to get like a real sense for industry challenges in the same space, I'd recognise that a lot of smaller organisations might not have the same level of investment. But I also, I often sort of think about when I started doing that EBRG work, like my black network within our organisation literally grew overnight. Like literally I was looking around going,
oh, there are some black people.
Where did this person come from? Where have you been? Where have you been all my career?
Haven't seen you around for a very long time. Yeah.
So that was one thing that really struck me. But the other thing was like, my experience as a black experience, I don't think was the same as a lot of people I spoke to. Like, I always sort of sit there and think, I had a long line of amazing managers that have supported and enabled me. to the point where actually a lot of them in my early career probably drove my career more than I did.
Yeah.
And whether that's lucky or not, as I sort of speak to other people, and their experience hadn't been necessarily the same, even within an organisation that I profess to be amazing, that I love and I respect. Like, some people were like, I don't feel like I've been seen. I don't think I've had a fair crack of the whip. I don't feel like I've been represented appropriately. And that was an interesting moment for me when I started thinking, well, okay, what can I do about that? How do I support and enable people like that? And then you start to see this whole piece around you can't be what you can't see. So having that representation in the senior roles within organisations can be really powerful. I often reflect on, I said about 50 years heritage in the States, like when we got involved with some of this work, not only did my experience of black people within the UK organisation change, but there'd be events that you'd go to, which would be global EBRG events, and literally you'd dial into teams, as we all do. But the whole idea of sort of seeing a room or a digital room, all of the tiles, and it's literally all black faces, was like really strange to me. I was like, wow, look at this. And you're hearing about all the amazing jobs that these people are doing, really, really senior, some of them. Very special energy in terms of how people are connecting and driving forward that agenda. So my idea to the ABPI was, how do we start to recreate that? Or is the ways that we could start to install almost industry-based EBRGs that people could potentially start to connect into? And at the time that I went to them with this idea, they were looking and starting to plan their first EDI conference. They'd done a lot of really interesting work around collecting data. So it worked out really nicely that we partnered to create their first EBRG conference and EBRG conference, apologies, their first ED&I conference.
Yep.
Which has now been running for many years, and I've really had the pleasure to sort of connect with and work with people that are leading that type of work. One of the things I was able to do to help them is to very quickly mobilise a group of ED&I leaders from various different organisations in the industry to really support and inform their plans. So they had the voice of the people that they're trying to reach out to. And where I was going is, I had this big plan where I wanted to sort of get to the point where we had like these EBRG structures, and obviously I was the guy that could start the black EBRG, and if we could do that in a really effective way, then actually, that's your blueprint, that's your MVP, where all of a sudden there might be an Asian person that wants to start a similar type structure for Asian employees, somebody for disabled, so on and so forth. But from an organisational perspective, that's not really where they wanted to go. Like for them, they're really committed to change, but they didn't want to go out with something that felt like it was just for one protected characteristic. They want to do something that was going to appeal and impact in a more broad perspective. Me obviously being the guy that I am was like going, well, if you're going to wait for that, then you'll never do anything.
Yeah, but it's true. If you're going to like wait for it all to be okay and equal and shared, and we have to do it all, and we have to start but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, I was frustrated. But by the same token, I get it. Change in big organisations is difficult. Being able to get the right level of alignment to start that type of thing can be challenging. And if I'm honest, I think at that point it's when I started thinking a little bit, where do I want to sort of play in terms of change? Like, I can't sit here and say social mobility is something I've thought about like all of my life. It probably was at that point where I started thinking, how could I potentially broaden the scope of where my focus is in a way that still allows me to speak to issues about race, for example, but in a way that I can use the same skills, have similar type of conversations, come up with solutions that have a broader impact and appeal. And often I think some of the issue with the way people take on issues around race, it almost happens within a vacuum. Like the reality is like any change that we want to sort of see has to happen in collaboration. And some people don't like this whole idea about allyship, but like...
You can't talk about race to a room full of black people. It just doesn't work,
because
we all know that group of people are very aware of the challenges and situations. And so we need to bring in the awareness of the other groups to help share. It's the same as being Asian, female, whatever your neurodiversity is. There is very little point if you're trying to make change, not for support and not for community. That's a very different thing. But if you are trying to impact change, we need to create more allies to help us make that change across the board.
100%. And I think sometimes there's a place for activism. that's when you've got no other options. And I think you can make some noise that gets people's attention, but you need to move relatively quickly to a point where the change that you want to do is going to be implemented by the people in control and the people in power. And I think that's the bit I often sort of try to play on now. And I know I've had experiences where you're in conversations or programs or workshops which are really sort of dial into race, but you have this problem where all the white people in the room are made to feel like racists.
And that's not who they are.
Not all the time, no. Like, for the majority, no. For some, maybe. But for the majority, no, absolutely not. And I think, that's an interesting place that I really want to sort of try to play out, right? How do you create the environments where people can be vulnerable enough to, release like their perspectives on the world based on their experience and challenge them? And some of them will be right. Some of them might be wrong, and you might be able to change them a bit. This whole idea of like holding your ideas quite loosely starts to become really important, because when new information comes along, you can change them. But also know that we're a product of our environment. Like, we used to run a workshop around diversity and inclusion, where actually we spent so much of the time really exploring who people were as 10-year-olds. And you might see Stephen Bartlett talking about it as a question. He used to use it quite a lot on the podcast. We've been doing that type of thing in training rooms for a long time as well. But I always found it really fascinating that, particularly when you sort of start to talk about issues like race, it meant that the average white guy or girl could have a conversation about some of the things they've experienced, which might have informed like their perspective on the world. For example, somebody that grew up in a house where their parents used to watch Bernard Manning on TV, that's potentially a bit of an older person. Let's say it could have been Chubby Roy Brown, that might be a little bit closer. But ultimately, those were the jokes that were going on in the household, and it was funny. But actually now, with a bit of distance, you can be like, that's not that funny, actually. I don't like that type of humour. But being able to talk about some of those things with distance, to say that's not who I am right now, I think starts to become really important.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do a better job of finding ways that people can connect with the issues here in a way that's meaningful, that inspires them to do something different. And then recognise that change doesn't need to be huge, massive, monumental things. Like,
it could just be the little things.
That's it.
And the little shift, and the curiosity, more importantly. The curiosity and the willingness to play with something and see where it goes.
You get it. And that's what it's all about. And I think there's an area where, we can have the big vision about what we try to do in terms of, we talked about equity and equality earlier on, but actually what are the tangible steps that we can start taking today, tomorrow, that allows us to move towards that, and not negating that those tiny steps could have a massive impact, even if it's just on one person. And that's pretty inspiring to me.
And is that the reason, or are those the reasons why you ultimately started the Black Sherpa?
Yeah, 100%. I've always felt fortunate to be in a situation where I'm relatively well connected. There's so many people around me that are genuinely interesting. I don't necessarily think that I am, but I'm connected with people that have got the most unbelievable stories. And beyond that, people trust me with their stories. I've always had an ability to get people to open up and talk. I think it's partly because I believe I'm a really good listener. I listen, I think, in the right way with an intent to help and support. And try my best just to give people a bit of space to express themselves, as you are right now, because I feel like you're getting some deep and long answers for me. But I think the Black Sherpa has given me an opportunity to start to create a platform where people can pay forward their experiences, can start to explore some of the issues or the challenges that potentially they've had and how they've overcome them. But then really, how can we start to focus on practical things that you as an individual can do? How do we empower that individual to drive and lead their own change? Or if you're fortunate enough to be in a situation where you've got power and privilege, what can you do to shape an environment that allows people to thrive and be successful? That's what I've really sort of focused on. How can I potentially go after that? In addition to that, I do think the podcasting bit came at a really interesting point for me. Like, I'd done the conference with the ABPI, and we sort of started to think about what might come next. And I was sort of thinking about what my next development opportunities are. And I think a big thing for me has been around actually, how do I start to build executive presence? I'm a great presenter. I'm good on my feet. But by the same token, I'm always sort of thinking about, how do you refine? How do you get better? How do you get more succinct? And you'll be laughing about that right now.
We'll think about that when we come to editing.
But, podcasting has really given me a platform to refine the way I could potentially communicate.
Yeah.
It's given me a amazing opportunity to connect with with so many great people like yourself. You know, if it wasn't for that, then we potentially wouldn't have had the opportunity to
have a conversation.
I don't care about the conversation. I care about our friendship. I care about the
Yeah.
fact that I can pick up the phone to you and I've got an issue or a challenge, and I can trust you for your advice or a perspective, and I know that you can do the same to me.
But it started with a conversation. And
Always
if
starts
it
with
wasn't,
conversation. It's
if
all
it
a
wasn't for
conversation.
that opportunity, then we probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
And it's the same with lots of other people in the same way, whether the people that have been on the podcast or Planet come onto it. I think that opportunity to connect in a way is pretty special. So yeah, there's so many benefits, right? But it's something it's just taught me a lot about myself, about people I know. Yeah,
What's
crazy.
the biggest lesson you've learned through podcasting about yourself? The one biggest.
Yeah, okay. The one biggest. Probably better than I give myself credit for. I think one of the things that sort of struck me, it's really difficult sometimes where you don't get a reflection of your ways of working all the time. I've worked in the same organisation for a very long time, and we do things a particular way. And I think like everybody else, like you'll have a development plan, you're assessed at the end of the year based on your goals or objectives. But working through, for example, a podcast has been a really interesting frame for me to sort of say, how do my ways of working relate outside of our organisation? I think one of the things that I've been a little bit humbled by is just the level of feedback that I get around my professionalism, the way that I prepare, the way that I help other people to feel prepared, the way that I'm very clear in terms of objectively, what do we try to do, the way that I communicate with people. Like frequently getting that type of feedback from people outside of our organisation has made me think a little bit differently about, well, actually, how good am I at that? And I think from that, it starts to build a different level of confidence. So I think, you know, I'd probably sort of believe I've always had that mindset of the power of the one, and I'm not one of many. But I think it's been a really valuable sort of confirming factor over the last couple of years that really helped me think very differently about how I'm setting some of my goals and aspirations for the future.
Awesome. We started this conversation with who is Yam. I'm going to take you all the way back and go, is there anything that you would change, reflect, adapt to how you introduced yourself at the beginning based on this conversation?
I think you've probably you've seen me in this conversation. You asked for a little something, and you probably got a little bit more. Hopefully, in through the conversation, there's a couple of gems that I'd start with. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. I hope you've potentially taken something from it. I hope our listeners will take something from it as a result. But for me, I think that whole idea of where I'm focusing right now is, what are the things that we can do to create an environment or a world where individuals are able to thrive, diverse voices are able to transform industries, not just in the pharmaceutical sector, but wherever you potentially might sit. I really want to be in a position where I can be a voice of empowerment to other people. And I think I've got a pretty special opportunity to do that. So nothing to add. I'll just keep working with my very many imperfections and try to do my very best.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.